Amen. Y'all sound great. I meant those online. You all sound amazing. Joking.
All right, Pastor Mike.
Yes.
I got a question because it's just bugging me. What is your shirt?
Oh.
What does your shirt mean?
Hey, thanks for asking. So you're an engineer, right?
Most days.
Most days.
Yeah.
Managing engineer, a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. What math me?
Okay. Equals
Yep.
greater than division sign.
Yeah. Equality is greater than division. There you go. There you go. See?
Okay.
Thanks for playing along with my dumb
like it.
skit. Thanks. We're glad. Thanks for singing, you all. Yeah, I thought this is appropriate. Today we're beginning a brand new conversation I am super excited about, and it started very reluctantly. So I think I've told this several times. In May, I did a sermon survey asking people for input and feedback as I went and planned the next year of sermons, and about 1 out of every 4 people asked some political question. And I was surprised because I get a little bit exhausted of politics. I like it and I get exhausted by it. You know, it's kind of both and. And I find most of the time when preachers or churches talk about politics, they either misuse the Bible to push their specific agenda, or they say something that's so kind of boring and generic that it's not that interesting. And I didn't want to do either of those. So I was working on a sermon series that politics was going to be 1 week because people were interested, but I kept on having more and more and more and more and more content. And I'm like, oh, God, you want me to preach this, don't you? Uh-huh. Okay, I'll do it. So I'll let you be the judge on whether God asked me to preach this or not. But I actually am really super excited. I'm really grateful if you're here. If you're a guest and I haven't gotten to meet you, I'd love to say hi after worship. For those of you worshiping online that are new or guests, please let us know that you're worshiping with us. I would love to say hi. Buzz, our communications coordinator, is also checking some of the social media. Please let us know you're worshiping with us. I want to begin with a question. Now, before I put it up there, does anybody know what the word silent means? All right, this is a silent question, all right? So let's put it up. Silent. Is the United States of America a Christian nation? See, we're going to have some fun, aren't we? Now, I say that because there's a lot of different answers, you know. Many of the original founders of the United States were different denominations of Christian. And some of them believed in God, but didn't really believe that God interacted or was involved in the world. We call that a deist. And some weren't religious at all. But one of the things they did at the very beginning, they said, hey, we want an amendment that says the United States isn't going to be a specific religion. Now, I think when they mention religion, they're thinking a Christian denomination because that's how most of them were exposed in that day. But they also said the government isn't going to interfere with anyone's religious tradition. And so there's a lot of religious freedom. Now, on the other hand, for the vast majority of our existence, most of us have been a specific religion. Christian, right? And at some points, an overwhelming amount of like a specific version of it. For example, anybody know what was the dominant religion, specific denomination in 1850? Come on, y'all. What church are we? Methodist. I tried to lob it up. Give me that other stuff. A third of the country, over 33% of the country, were United Methodist Christians. Do you know how many there are today? 3.6%. People, we got a lot of work to do. And most people aren't religious at all today, aren't actively involved in any active church faith community. We have a lot of work to do. But I point that out to simply say, whenever we ask a question, is the United States a Christian nation? people have different answers to that. Do you want to know my answer? I'm not telling you. I'll tell you a little bit later. But it reminded me of another question. And if you rewind history, go back in history over 2,000 years ago, in Jesus' life, a question that I thought of, was Israel a Jewish nation? There's a lot of different answers, actually. It wasn't that simple. So in times of Israel's history, at times it was a theocracy, meaning a God-led and God-dictated government. At times it was a monarchy, which is a anointed king. Typically a priest in Israel's history would anoint a king as a secular ruler of the country. Most often in Israel's history, it was a divided nation between Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And they each had kings, or they had multiple kings. At times it's been a democracy where these people self-ruled and self-elected governors. But in the time of Jesus, it wasn't any of those. It was actually an occupied state. It was a part of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire appointed a governor of the land. For example, when Jesus would die, the governor was Pontius Pilate. Now, they also allowed some freedom for the Jewish people to elect some of their own political leaders. And so, for example, when Jesus was born, it was King Herod the Great. When Jesus died, it was a descendant of King Herod the Great, Herod Antipas. And my point is, just like if we ask, is U.S. a Christian nation, and people would give different answers, back then, people would give different answers. Is Israel or is Judah a Jewish nation? So let's talk about their political parties. Now, they wouldn't have used the term political parties, but there were groups that had their own understanding of the political nature of Jesus' day. For example, there was one, you may have heard about them, called the Pharisees. The Pharisees were people who were believed in adhering to strict Old Testament Jewish laws, but more in the spiritual sense, more in the moral sense than the actual political sense. They were like, politics, we kind of conflicted about that. But spiritually, you're supposed to hold on to the Jewish laws. The next step was the Essenes. Essenes believed that Romans' occupation of Israel was a sign of God's impending judgment. And so they fled and hid in the countryside, places like the Qumran caves, which is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those were from the Essenes. They kind of hid in these small remote villages and just waited for God's judgment to come upon all the earth. The Sadducees were probably the most powerful. They were the ones who were in charge of the temple. They were very rich. They were very powerful. And they actually loved the Roman Empire. And they loved the Roman Empire not because they believed in the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire gave them peace and prosperity, and they benefited from it. So like, hey, let the money flow. We're all good. The Zealots, on the other hand, vehemently hated Rome. They believed the occupation of Israel was a violation of God's will, and they believed in a military fighting, overthrowing of the Roman Empire. They advocated violence, and they were angry. And the last were the Herodians. Herodians weren't especially religious. They just really liked the Herodian Empire and wanted the peace of the Roman Empire and specifically the Herodian leadership to continue. So, all these different political perspectives. Do you want to know which of those that Jesus was? I want you to read about it, all right? So this comes late in Jesus' life, about 3 years after his public ministry. His language had become much more critical of the power and control of the elite. And he started irritating them because he really emphasized the poor, the marginalized, and hurting people that he spent time with. And now he was heading down south towards Jerusalem, and he had a big population. And so people were angry, people were nervous, people were threatening, and they're trying to figure out, what are they going to do with this Jesus problem? In fact, the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Zealots all viewed Jesus as a problem for different reasons, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So they were kind of like trying to figure out, what do we do with him? The Essenes are piecing out in the caves, but the Herodians, they're trying to figure out we're in the mix. So they bring Jesus to Caiaphas, the Sadducees in charge of the temple. And Caiaphas is just angry because Jesus did things like turning over the money changers, which wasn't about selling things in church. It was about the church taking advantage of poor people, but it was upsetting the economic system. And they're mad, and the Pharisees are mad, so they want Jesus taken care of, but they can't do it. Under Jewish law, they couldn't kill anybody, but under Roman law, they could. And so they all like, okay, Rome, help us out on this one. Even the Zealots are like, okay, we'll allow you to help us out on this one. So they take him to Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate, who, interestingly enough, I find kind of an interesting leader, because he's like, okay, Sadducees are telling me one thing, and Pharisees are telling me another, and Zealots are, I don't know what they're saying. Herodians are saying something else. I want to hear from the dude. So he calls Jesus in. And in John 18:33, Pilate went back to the palace. He summoned Jesus and said, dude, what's going on? Are you the king of the Jews? And he's trying to figure out, like, are you trying to throw over Caiaphas? Are you trying to throw over King Herod? Are you trying to oppose Caesar? Or like, help me understand, what's your political agenda here? And Jesus talks a little bit, and then in verse 36, Jesus said this: my kingdom doesn't originate from this world. If it did, my guards would fight so that I wouldn't have been arrested by the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom isn't from here. This is the word of God for all of God's creation. Thanks be to God. Jesus is asked a political question, and he gives a spiritual answer, which I think is important for us to hear as a starting point for this sermon series. Because we live in a world where oftentimes we begin to buy into a lie that what we need most is a political answer. And what Jesus says is you actually have a spiritual problem. And I don't mean to everybody out there that too, but I mean those of us right here. And I think whenever we hear a sermon like this, we're thinking of, oh, they need to hear this. Oh, you should tell it to them. My mom taught me whenever I point with a finger, there's how many fingers pointing back at me? 3, thank you. Some people say 4. I'm like, I can't get my thumb to point back. Like maybe that. Right. But I need to hear it more than others. So I'd encourage you to hear these words. Because over the next several weeks, we're going to dig deep into some spiritual answers to political problems. And I am super excited. So today we're going to talk really quickly, well, some more quickly than others. And then each week we're going to build and go a little bit deeper into some of the real practical wisdom and challenging things that Jesus would give us to help us live the life that God created us for in the world that God came to bring. And so I want to just begin with some 4 things today. First, Jesus relentlessly always chooses people over politics. Jesus always chooses people over politics. It's interesting. What I think is the most frequent kind of political debate that Jesus had in the ancient world was with the Jewish leaders around the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath was a 24-hour period from Friday at sunset until Saturday at sunset where you could do nothing. And whenever whenever your parents told you as a kid, like, you can't do it, you're grounded, then you start, like, trying to figure, well, you have to stay in your room. Okay, what about going to the edge? What about, like, my feet are in the room, but my arms are out in the hallway? You ever do this, right? Well, the same thing they did this is like, how much can we do on the Sabbath? So there are all these rules about the Sabbath. Well, the annoying thing about Jesus is he didn't follow the rules, or at least the rules they made. And he always pushed him and always challenged him. And so one example, for example, is Jesus asked the leaders, does the law allow healing on the Sabbath or not? By the way, does anybody remember when in the United States we used to have laws that didn't allow stores to open on Sunday, or didn't allow stores to open before noon, or you didn't allow certain things to be sold? Yeah, that's right. That still finds its roots in this. And we always struggled with it. Well, can I? Does the law allow healing on the Sabbath? It was a political question. They said nothing. They're like, uh-oh, this is a trap. This guy's smart. So Jesus took a hold of a sick man, and he cured him, and he sent him on. And Jesus said, now suppose your child, or suppose your ox fall into a well on the Sabbath. Wouldn't you rescue them? So why do you argue about healing this man who's a child of God? You see, so often in our lives, I think that I get angry, and I suspect some of you get angry, about political ideas. And I argue about ideas and concepts in politics because ideas and concepts in politics, we can be angry at those. We can hate ideas. Whenever I look into somebody's eyes, that's different. And Jesus is like, no. When you're talking about politics, it's actually talking about people. You just love your anger, and so you vilify an idea rather than loving a person. And Jesus said, no. When we talk about politics, we must always engage in thinking about the very personal aspect of it. By the way, whenever we talk about how any number of political issues, we need to think about who are the people that this is impacting. Most of the times we're like, how does this impact me? But Jesus has this nerve of saying, well, think about your brother or your sister as much as you think about yourself, right? Well, who's my brother? I know my brother. I know my sister-in-law. I don't have a sister, but I have a sister-in-law. Okay, I'll include them. No. What about the Samaritan? What about your enemy? What about the person that you see on TV that makes your blood boil? That I have to love them, and I have to love their children as much as I love my own nieces and nephews? Do you see the problem? We want to be angry because we want to make people a policy, a product, a fact, a thing. And Jesus says, people aren't things. Every person, you can't make, there's no exceptions. Every person is a beloved child of God. And if I'm a child of God and they're a child of God, you know what that makes us? Brothers and sisters. And I have to love them even when my brother drives me crazy and takes my stuff and blames me on things that we both know he did. I still have to love him as much as I love myself. So let's talk about Amin Khalif. Do you know Amin Khalif? Like, no? She's the boxer that there's questions about whether she can participate or should be participating in the Olympics or not. You're like, oh my gosh, Pastor Mike, you didn't say that. I know I did. I said we're going to have fun. So I heard about her on news, and I'm like, what's going on? I didn't really know anything. So some of the quotes that I said, that I saw, Italian Premier Meloni said Khalif's participation was just the latest evidence of a woke culture infecting sports. The International Olympic Committee president responded by saying ideology taken to extremes can discriminate and harm women's rights. Now, by the way, I didn't choose any people in our political system because I didn't want to quote somebody that you had a visceral reaction because of the person, not because of the content. And I did that intentionally. But here's what I find a lot of really interesting is I read those, and I read a couple dozen articles about her and about different opinions about her. It's interesting to me that people on both ends of the political spectrum, both perspectives have been talking about her as if she was a thing. They've been using her to push an agenda, a political agenda. It's a perspective. They've been using her to win an argument. They've been using her to prove a point. They've been using her. Did you hear that phrase, using her? Friends, we don't use people, especially as Jesus followers. We don't use people. What do we do with people? We love them. No person is an agenda. A person is a beloved child of God. And I think this is so powerful because so much of the visceral and hate is around a world that can objectify somebody in a way that you can begin to vilify and demonize. And for whatever person, I'm not talking about one side or another. I'm saying we use it. And Jesus says, in fact, whenever I started reading the articles, the question that came to mind is, Jesus, what would you want your follower, what would you tell me and us, your followers, to do in this situation? Any guesses the first thing Jesus whispered to me? Love? Yeah, more specific, what would I do? What about pray? First thing I did was after I read a whole bunch of articles, I prayed for I prayed for the IOC chair. I prayed for the Italian premier. I went to every single article, looked at who wrote it, and I prayed for them. I prayed. The other thing that God asked me to do was to listen to her story, to not talk about her, but to the best of my ability to talk to her, to have a conversation. And the only way I could do this was to try to hear her words, hear her story. And so I began reading articles about her. I found out she was born in a rural village of the Tairet province in northwestern Algeria. Do you know where the northwestern Algeria Tairet province is? I don't, so I had to look it up on a map. Like, what's that community look like? What is it? How do they treat people there? What's the economic? I had to chase it down. When she was young, I thought this was interesting. When she was young, her dad didn't want her to box. Any of you didn't want your kids to do like some sports or something when they were young? She had the same dad, like, I don't want you doing that. You can play soccer. And she played soccer for a long time, but she kept on wanting to box. And finally, I know this is going to shock you for parents, she finally wore her dad down, and her dad allowed her to chase her dream. Not that any of your kids ever wear you down and that you allow them to do what they want to do, right? And he actually is one of her biggest fans. He supports, and I began to listen to her friends and her other colleagues. I realized that in March in 2020, she's a good boxer. She's not like, oh my gosh, amazing. But in 2023, she competed for the gold medal finals at the IBA Women's World Boxing Championships. However, she was disqualified shortly before her gold medal because her testosterone levels were too high to compete. Now, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Help me understand. They didn't release the test as far as I could tell. It's not specific, and there's a bunch of people saying, well, here's what it is, or here's what it is, or here's what it is, but there's no real evidence about exactly what's going on. There's a lot of we thinks or I think, and honestly, I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't need to know. You know why I don't need to know? Because I'm not the one deciding whether she should participate or not, right? What do I need to know? I need to know that she's a beloved child of God, that she has some unique DNA, the way she was born, that has some elevated testosterone. I think, I don't know all the facts. Some of you may know more than me. I don't discount that. But she isn't a transgender person, even though she's been used to argue about transgender people. Not that that would cause me to love her any differently or pray for her any differently, but it does help me empathize and understand and hear her story. Does that make sense? I began to pray not only for her, but for her friends, for her family, for people that know her and have to hear the rest of the world talking about her, who have no idea how wonderful she is, who have no idea the jokes she tells, who have no idea to what it's like to spend an evening hanging out with her and what she likes to do. See, the world is consumed with using her. And Jesus says, no, I want you to love her. So I'm going to give you a challenge. For until the election, and by the way, I don't mean the Tuesday election. We have an election Tuesday. I mean the November election. Until the November election, I want to challenge you not to say, write, or post anything negative about any of the political candidates. Some of you are laughing. Why? Why should I do that? I'm not talking about their policies or beliefs, facts. Saying, I don't know about you've seen this, but I'm listening. This is going to shock you. But I'm listening to advertisements that are just saying awful things. That if they ever said that about my brother or my parents or my niece or nephew, I would be offended. Well, here's the thing. They are my brothers and sisters. So shouldn't I be offended? And if they are my brothers or sisters, whoever they are, the one you like and the one you don't, then shouldn't I want people to say things about them the same way they would talk about my nieces or nephews or my wife? Right? If I'm talking about somebody else, you're like, Pastor Mike, that's just unrealistic. I get it. If you want to live like everybody else lives, that's fine. If you want to live like Jesus, there's a different expectation. And you wonder why we have anger and hate. We like to blame everybody else, but honestly, most of the time we have to look in the mirror ourselves. I don't want you to say anything negative. I want you to pray for them. Pray for the one you vote. Pray for the ones you don't vote for. Pray for their families. Pray for their kids. Pray for their spouse. Could you imagine? Think about this. Could you imagine if cameras followed you around every day and listened to everything you say, like focused in on you every time you ate at a restaurant and every time you like took a big bite of a juicy burger and like all this stuff gets, you all probably eat better than I do, but it's all over your face. Like they're taking a picture, they're selling it, they're vilifying it, and they're going to make a stupid meme about you or about your spouse or about your kids. Wouldn't that be awful? I think it would. Well, if I don't want that for me, I have to love my neighbor and love my enemy. Not that any candidate is my enemy. They may think differently than me. That doesn't make them my enemy. I make them my enemy. But I have to love them as much as I love myself. Right? When we begin to think about politicians as people, as beloved children of God, we begin to give grace and empathy and live and love more like Jesus. All right, we got to cover a lot more stuff. You ready? I could keep on preaching just on this one point. You ready to move on? Because I got more stuff to kick you in the knees about. All right. Second, choose unity over division. There's a lot of dumb things I say. I was waiting to see if there's an amen. Sorry. There's a few smart things. Probably a decade ago, I was sitting in the pool with some friends, hanging out, and there was somebody, I was on one of those floaties, and he was on a floaty, and he's very, 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 very different politically than where I am. And he was just obnoxious. I know that's hard for you to imagine. Bless his heart. And so I listen, not because of anything other than I really believe that listening is an act of love. And so I listen to people rather than argue with people. At my best moments, I'm not always there, don't get me wrong. But I was listening for a ridiculously long time. And finally, after a while, it paused and I said, can I give you a piece of unsolicited advice? He said, sure. I still remember this. I said, you can either try to be right or try to be loved, but I don't think you can be both. And for the next several years, every time, about once a month, I'd see him at different things. He would re-quote that same line to me. Here's the best part, is it literally changed his relationship with his kids, with his partner, with his friends, with me. It remarkably made him a different person. Because in that moment, he had to make a choice. Was I gonna be right, or was I gonna choose to be in community? You know Jesus' one prayer. I preached this the first weekend of 2024. I said this is one of my prayer verses all for 2024. It comes in the middle of a prayer, and Jesus, right before his death, right before he goes to Caiaphas and Pilate, he's in the garden praying. It begins in John 15, continues in 16 and in 17, this verse. It's the only place he prays for us. He says in John 17:20, I'm not praying only for them as his followers. I'm not only praying for my followers, but also for those people who will believe because of their word. Meaning, who are the people that believe because of the words of his followers? That's me. If you want to live and follow Jesus, that's you. If you don't, I'm really glad you're here. I think some of this is really practical. It'll work whether you're a Jesus follower or not, but this is specifically talking to Jesus followers. He's saying, I'm praying for my followers and the people who are going to come after them, who are going to believe in them. So he's praying for us, which is mind-boggling. He says, I pray that they will be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, I pray that they also will be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. He didn't pray that we would be right. He didn't pray that we would be perfect. He didn't pray that we would be rich. That would have been a nice one too. He prayed that we would be one. Friends, we live in a world where it's easy to buy in the lie that we want to be right about ideas. Jesus wants us to live as one with people. And that's a choice you make about how you live, but also how you choose to see other people, how we choose to live in community. Here's a question. Do you want to share Jesus? Do you want to share Jesus? What Jesus says, if you want to share Jesus, in an incredibly divided political world, live together, not that you're all going to vote the same. I really love being a pastor where I know on Tuesday, some of us are going to take the Republican primary, and some of us are going to take the Democrat primary, and some of us are going to take the Libertarian primary, and some of us are going to take the none of the above primary, and some of us have already taken one of the primaries, and some of us won't take any of the primaries, and I can still be all your pastors, right? And we get to sing together, and we get to worship together. Why? Because I value being one more than being right. Just know that I am right. But no, I'm just teasing. That's the one clip that Dustin's going to pull out of the... No, sorry. Choose unity over division. I got to go through these quickly. Choose a practical over ideological. We're going to talk about this next week. John Wesley gives some instructions about how to live to his early Methodists. We're going to look at how those instructions shape our engagement in the political world. I am super excited about next week. It's going to be jam-packed with some really exciting things. What's fascinating to me in this political climate is that most of the time we get angry about things that we have no control over, right? Like I brought up Miss Khalif, the boxer, and some of you already are getting angry about something I didn't say, but you heard. He said, no, I didn't make any judgment about what she should be doing or not doing or what the Olympic Committee or I didn't say any of that. Why? That's not my decision. And if I have an opinion, you know what it's worth? What I have in my pocket right now, which is nothing. Like it doesn't matter. So why do I allow it to get angry? Why do I allow it to poison my spirit? Focus on what you can do. What can you do? Vote. Tuesday, you have the ability to vote for primaries as well as 2 Missouri constitutional amendments. If you didn't know that, go research it. Figure out what a wise decision is. I'm not going to tell you. You can figure it out. You're smart people. What else can you do? You can call or write your elected officials, right? By the way, this is one of the most impactful things you can do, and I'm guessing very, 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 very few of us actually do it. We like to complain, but we don't like to advocate. right? We like to bemoan. We like to be miserable. Just do something. Do what you can do and trust God with the rest. By the way, that's the most important thing we can do, pray. Pray for our communities, pray for our country, pray for our world, pray for the political candidates, the ones that you support, the ones that you don't support. And by the way, just making sure everybody hears this, pray good things for the ones you don't support, okay? Pray. How many hours do you spend watching news, getting worried, watching your blood pressure, and how much time do you spend praying? And we wonder why we're miserable. Why do we allow something we have no control over to rob us of joy? Because we're living like a world calls us to live rather than living like Jesus teaches us to live. Turn off the news and spend time praying as much as you're learning. Pray. By the way, do what you can and trust God with the rest. Do you know what we call that? Prayer. Faith. We talked all about this a couple weeks ago. This may shock you. You may need to write this down. November 3rd, or whenever the election's decided, write this down. God will still be God. Thank you. Give me an amen online. Come on. When we step into a ballot box, whether it's Tuesday or November, when you step in the ballot box, you're not voting for a savior. Somebody already has that job. You're voting for a person to make wise decisions to lead us to that you think would do the best person for the job. Vote for who you think. Trust God with the rest. I started with the question, is the United States a Christian nation? I think it's a wrong question to ask, honestly, because Jesus had the ability to choose to create a nation. God had the ability to, and God didn't and hasn't. And so if Jesus didn't do it, then probably I shouldn't do it either. The question I think that's more interesting is, what does it mean to be a Christian in the United States of America? Not that it's only United States, but that's where we are. I'm proud to be in the United States. So if I was preaching in Algeria, I would say, what does it mean to be a Christian in Algeria? But there's a word, and I can't find the source of it, but years ago somebody took this word, kingdom, over kingdoms. Kingdoms is about power and control and how you use that power in an organizational structure. Kingdoms is about relationship and community and how we're called to live together, absent of power and structure. Jesus came to say, my kingdom is different. It's not of this world. And I suspect if he had the Greek ability, he would have been using the word kingdoms over kingdoms. Today we're going to do something as a response to the message. You don't have to. You're welcome to. We would love for you to. Those online, you're invited to come and share too.